Welcome to Secure Money Mindset, where seasoned advisors cover the topics that matter most to your financial future. Each episode is packed with practical insight, real conversations, and guidance you can trust. Let's dive in.
Hi everyone, Alison Pettine here from Secure Planning Group. And today I am joined by Greg Gilston of Gilston Legal. He's the owner and managing attorney of the practice, and he focuses on family law and estate planning. So thanks so much for joining us today, Greg.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to be joined by Greg today because we're focusing on a huge topic that I know I get a lot of questions about, which is, do I need a prenup, and what the heck actually is a prenup, and who needs them, right?
In short, I'm going to say the answer is yes. And, a lot of people need them, despite the fact that the misconception is most people need to be very rich or wealthy to have them. So
Right.
talk about that.
Yeah, that's the one common thing I get too. I need to be wealthy. But Greg's going to go through all of those ins and outs of prenups today so that you'll be able to get all your questions answered. So why don't we just kick it off?
Yeah.
Greg, tell us a little bit about what a prenup actually entails.
Okay, great. So a prenup at its core is a contract, and it's a private contract between two parties who plan on getting married soon, but hopefully not too soon.
Okay.
Because that's an element of making sure that the prenup is enforceable, is making sure that there's some time to plan, negotiate, and just confirm that the terms look the way both parties will feel comfortable with. So it's a private contract between both parties, and it's really meant to protect both parties in the event of death or divorce. And both parties are negotiating the terms of the agreement prior to the marriage. That is the kicker. I will say there's also this concept of postnuptial agreements,
Right.
where people negotiate the terms after they're married. The difference there is minimal, right? I mean, it's the same kind of contract. It's the same kind of enforceability terms. It really kind of rates the same. The only difference I see between a prenup and a postnup is leverage. The leverage being that if you don't sign this prenuptial agreement, perhaps we can't get married. The postnup being, if you don't sign this postnuptial agreement, well, I don't really know what I have to hold against you because we're still married.
We're still married. Exactly.
It's the leverage that really differs between those two types of agreements. But with prenups, you're thinking just right? What needs to come before the marriage?
Sure. So contract before the marriage.
Correct. It's pretty simple. And it comes with a lot of flexibility. And I think that's also another common misconception. We spoke previously about how people think you need to be wealthy and have a ton of assets to get a prenup. Not true. Specifically now that people get married later, accumulate wealth prior to the marriage and have separate assets prior to the marriage. It doesn't matter if it looks like 10,000, 100,000, or $1 million. Those are appreciating assets that will appreciate during the marriage, and they should be considered necessary to protect prior to the marriage. But realistically, it's not so cut and dry as to what goes into a prenup. I like doing them more than anything else in my practice because it allows me to be creative, and it allows parties to be creative about what they put in the agreement.
Well, that gets into the next point, which is what needs to be in that agreement and how do you make it creative? I think that's a really good point. But creativity, because I think people have this misconception that it's very cut and dry.
Right. The common misconception is prenups are going to say what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, what's ours is ours. And don't get me wrong, that makes my job easier as an attorney if that's what the agreement says. It's quite frankly the easiest type of prenuptial agreement to write and to negotiate. You often see those types of prenups for people in their second marriage or third marriage or fourth marriage,
Right.
because you're looking at older individuals who really don't want to go through the divorce or equitable distribution process, which in Pennsylvania means how do we divide marital assets and liabilities. They don't want to go through that process in older age. They want to say, okay, I've come to this marriage with assets, with things to protect and financially, and I'm going to protect them before I even enter this marriage and say I do. So those are commonly the types of prenups you see for older individuals. But that's not the only type of prenup you see. You see moneyed spouses with significant business assets trying to protect those business assets and then negotiating away lump sum payments in exchange for being able to hold on to their businesses without their spouse being able to access it at divorce or death, right? You see parents of people getting married kind of meddling in the marital process by saying you're going to get an inheritance and we need to find a way to add an extra layer of protection for that inheritance prior to you getting married. So there are terms, depending on what the parties need, that can be negotiated and baked into a prenup. The key is both parties have to agree because neither one is obligated to sign.
Okay, that's interesting. So what I'm hearing from you is, one, if you have a business, that might kind of kickstart something. I need to talk to Greg.
Right.
Maybe get a prenup. And the second one is absolutely an inheritance. And you might have your family involved or not involved.
And I would say with inheritances, it's kind of nuanced because technically under the divorce law, and when I give a prenuptial agreement consultation, I always explain the divorce law, because why would I tell you about why you need a prenup if you don't know what the divorce law would dictate if you didn't have one?
Sure.
Right. And so the divorce law actually counts inheritances as separate property. And that's
Right.
However, the increase in value that's experienced on that separate property during the marriage can be attributed to the marital property. So let's say, just to use easy numbers, you inherit $100,000. You invest those $100,000 in a stock. The stock doubles in value during the marriage. So your value is now $200,000. The inheritance principal of $100,000 will be separate property no matter what under Pennsylvania law. The increase in value, if it was experienced during the marriage, will be subject to the marital split. So that is something you can protect with a prenuptial agreement by saying that investments, whether or not they were with separate property or marital property, can be kept separate. You just need to be specific with the terms. And that's what I say by adding an extra layer of protection for inheritances, because technically the divorce law in Pennsylvania does inherently protect inheritance assets, just not the increase in value.
Sure. And that makes sense. And that's something that you work with your clients on, and creating that prenuptial agreement and creating that language that makes sense that they're both going to be able to agree upon.
Right. And just hearkening back to what you said previously. Yes. If you own a business and you're entering a marriage and your operating agreement is silent or does speak to how that business asset should be split in the event that you divorce your spouse, you still want a prenuptial agreement. That is like a must have. You own a business, get the prenups. Because that's, you're working hard for that. That's a valuable asset. And it's something that in most circumstances, your spouse is not involved in the day-to-day operations.
Sure.
So you don't want them finding a way for financial ownership or control in the event of divorce.
Right. And so even if it's a small business, any kind of business, that is, I guess.
Mostly any kind of business. For example, in a law firm, I'm a professional LLC. Sorry, honey, but you couldn't have this business if you wanted it because it's a professional LLC. So you're not a lawyer, so you can't run this business, right?
Right.
Based on the way the business is structured, most businesses will allow some sort of takeover from a spouse unless it's a professional corporation that requires a professional license to run the business.
Okay.
Like a doctor or a lawyer. So you need a professional license. Not anyone can step into the business. If you don't need a professional license, then anyone could theoretically step into the business, depending on how it's structured.
Very interesting. This is why clearly you got to consult with Greg to figure out all the language and see what makes sense, because this is all really important stuff. Talk just about, and what we hit on in the beginning, where you don't have to be the misconception of being super wealthy. Obviously, we hit on inheritance and business, and obviously there's wealth in those things. But this misconception that you have to have $1 million estate or multi-million dollars.
It's hugely important. It's hugely important to understand that anyone these days, specifically considering the divorce rate being so high, should consider a prenuptial agreement. The three types of groups of individuals that I would say are not millionaires oftentimes, but do need prenuptial agreements are, one, young professionals, right? I mean, most people are getting married later. They're getting married 30, 33. They've had about 10 years of professional experience to acquire assets, to acquire retirement assets, income, maybe investment assets. That's separate property that it may not look like $1 million. It may look like 80,000, 100,000, 200,000 if you're lucky, but you want to maintain that as your separate property, because if they're in the right type of appreciating asset, those are going to go up in value over time. And the increase in value that occurs during the marriage under Pennsylvania law is subject to the split, even if it's separate property.
Right.
So Yeah, I mean, that's one type of individual. This was an interesting conversation for me to have, but my sister-in-law recently got married to an awesome guy who I really, really love, and they're both young professionals. He's 33, she's 31. They both have great paying jobs in New York, and I said, you guys are a great couple. With that being said, though, considering how hard you've worked for the past 10 years before you met each other, you should look into a prenup. And it's just because they're young professionals who got married later, relatively speaking, and they had assets.
Sure.
So that's one group of people.
So young professional.
Yeah, for sure.
First group of people. That's great. Yeah, like you said, 10 years, somewhere around 10 years plus experience of working, growing assets, maybe buying a house.
Yeah, I would say if your retirement asset is over, 10K,
Right.
to be honest, you think about it, because the cost proposition there of getting a prenuptial agreement, it checks out, especially if the increase in value of the retirement funds are going to go up over time.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, great. First one.
So yeah, the next one, I would say anyone, we spoke about it briefly, but anyone on a second, third, or fourth marriage, right? And they may be wealthy, they may not be wealthy, but they certainly don't want to go through the process of divorce that they went through the first time, specifically if they didn't have a prenuptial agreement. So that just goes without being said. That is like the most common type of person who comes for a prenup, is someone who went through a divorce is like, I never want to do that.
Never knew it again. Yep.
And then I would say the third group is just anyone getting married with children from another relationship.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. It's really good.
You don't necessarily know if your spouse is going to protect that child the same way you would, or the same way their other parent would. I also think in most cases, especially since a prenup can be an estate planning an estate planning tool, you can use the terms of a prenup to dictate where the assets go in the event of death or divorce. So if you have a child from another marriage, either death or divorce terms can help to flow the asset to the child as opposed to flow it to your spouse or ex-spouse.
That's a really good point. And does it matter if the child is a minor or their age, or?
It only matters for how you set up the receipt of the asset. I mean, if they're a minor, you're going to want to probably set up a trust,
Okay.
because minors shouldn't be handling financial assets on their own.
Sure.
But it doesn't necessarily have to be a trust that exists past their 18th birthday, especially if you trust them to make financially smart decisions. The one thing I'll say is, if the child exists or is alive at the time of the marriage and they're from another marriage or another relationship, it's important to make sure that your assets flow to them so they're not left high and dry in the event your future ex-spouse takes more than you want them to.
Sure. Okay. So that's really, I mean, those three are huge. So young professionals, we have people that are on their second, third, fourth marriage, and then people that have children from a previous marriage or marriages plural. So
Yeah, or even just a relationship. Right?
or to a relationship.
We're not going to assume everyone's getting married these days, but most people, unfortunately, are weary of the institution.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
But those are three really good groups that need to consider getting that prenuptial agreement.
Yeah, and there are more, but it runs the gamut.
Absolutely.
But those are three I would say are common.
Very common. I love it. And for any group, obviously those three we're hitting on right now, but talk to us about the enforceability factor when it comes to the prenuptial agreement.
So it's interesting. Enforceability is the name of the game when it comes to prenuptial agreements in Pennsylvania. There are different statutory requirements for an enforceable agreement in different states. In Pennsylvania, the courts care more about the process of signing, negotiating the terms of the agreement than actually what's in the agreement. Our neighboring state, New Jersey, doesn't play that game. New Jersey cares about the contents. Pennsylvania cares about the process. So what I call the foundational pillars of enforceability in Pennsylvania are as follows. Number one, you have to have full and fair disclosure of existing assets, liabilities, and income as close to the date of the marriage as possible. And I say as close to the date of the marriage as possible because I'm not going to ask you for your financial statements the day you're getting married.
Right.
And we know that bank accounts change pretty much every day, so do investments. But I would say the rule of thumb is the previous end of the quarter before you get married, make sure your financial statements and your financial disclosures are up to date. As part of every prenuptial agreement, we attach 2 exhibits, sometimes more. But if you have 2 exhibits, they're going to be wife's exhibit A financial disclosure, husband's exhibit A financial disclosure, or in today's society, just spouse A, spouse B.
Okay.
I don't want to assume wife and husband, but
Sure.
essentially it's a financial disclosure that lays out, here are my assets, values, here's the bank account that holds them, the institution, and the last four was the account number. So we have it.
Makes sense.
Assets, liabilities like credit card, student loans, and then of course income. And income, we say maybe just the W-2 values from the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
To see some consistency there, if there is. And both parties are going to need to produce that. And that's full and fair disclosure of existing assets, liabilities, and income. And I will tell you, if you leave something off your financial disclosure, and the prenuptial agreement essentially uses the financial disclosure as a catch-all, saying like, okay, and everything on the financial disclosure is also protected by the terms of this agreement. If it's not on a financial disclosure, it's not protected. Right. And I'll tell you just a quick story. I had an individual who owned a couple businesses come to me. He had a lot of different accounts, business accounts, individual accounts. He was quite wealthy. And probably a week before his wedding, he goes, I forgot a $500,000 Amex checking account.
Oh boy.
I said, well, you almost lost $500,000 or some portion of it in the event that you didn't put it on your financial disclosure. We were able to get it on the financial disclosure. We didn't have to negotiate new terms. His partner was understanding, and so was her attorney, and we just baked it into the financial disclosure. But if he left that out and they got married, that would have been left off, and that would have been a problem.
That would have been a huge problem.
And relatively speaking, for him, it may not have been a problem. Right. It would have been a problem.
So full and fair disclosure, huge. You gotta be organized, clearly, in that sense, but showing everything that you have, assets, and liabilities and income. Sorry.
Yeah, and part of that may actually be like, if you own a business, it may be your operating agreement, it may be your balance sheet, because those are assets that in due time, if they're not on the prenuptial agreement, could be subject to the marital split in some way, shape, or form. So anything that will increase in value or exist during the marriage that also exists prior to the marriage, it needs to be shown and disclosed, and it needs to be transparent.
Do you find that challenging for people to give that full and fair disclosure, or?
It's a good question. It's not as challenging as you think, because oftentimes the people that approach me to write their prenuptial agreement are the moneyed spouse, and they're the ones who know that I'm trying to protect these assets. So while they may look pretty robust right now, they're going to look even better in a few years, and that's why I have this protection tool in place anyway. So it actually benefits the moneyed spouse to show everything they have, and it also sets a precedent for the marriage if they're not going to show everything they have.
So, well, that's a really good point.
Yeah,
really
so that's one consideration. I would say the next pillar is that the drafting and negotiation process and the signature process has to be free of fraud or duress.
Okay.
And so the fraud part goes into the transparency part on the financial disclosure.
Right.
The duress part has to mean that, one party is signing this agreement on their own free will and accord, and they can't be coerced into signing, and timing is a huge issue. Duress takes on a couple of meanings. It could mean, the leverage that we're talking about, saying, we already put down $200,000 for this wedding, and then you say, well, I'm not getting married to you if you don't sign this prenup, even if you're not comfortable with the terms. That's a form of duress. The most common form of duress we see is having someone sign a prenuptial agreement that they weren't part of negotiating and having them sign it right before the wedding. Yeah. And actually the landmark case out of Pennsylvania is called Simeon versus Simeon, and that is exactly what happened in that case, where there was minimal time for the wife to sign the prenup, to understand her rights and obligations, and the dispute in that case had to do with alimony. But it really could have to do with anything. If there's not enough time to negotiate the terms or, discuss the terms or even agree to the terms, duress will be a huge problem for enforceability.
Okay. So I'm going to ask, what's the time frame? Maybe can you give us?
There is no hard and fast rule, but I will say if someone calls me less than a month before their wedding and says, draft my prenup, I will say, unless you can get your spouse on the phone to say that you agree to the terms before I even get involved, the answer is no.
Okay.
So I'm really tight. A month is tight. It really is, because not only are you considering that we need to gather financial statements and have your attorney review the financial statements for accuracy and make sure that they can put it on the disclosure. We need to draft a document, which usually comes out to no less than 20 pages.
Oh, wow.
We need to make sure that there's a bit of time for negotiation. And, not a shocker, but a lot of us attorneys are busy. We're not going to start this tomorrow. So if you're getting a good prenuptial agreement attorney to draft and negotiate the terms of your agreement, you want to give them some time to actually bake it into their schedule.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what's a good, just for the audience, what's a good time scale? What do you say, 6 months?
Well, 6 months would be amazing.
Wow.
I will say this. Knowing how people operate, give me at least 6 or 8 weeks.
6 or 8 weeks. Okay. Yeah.
But also I'll say this. I've had an agreement where someone hired me a year in advance and it still didn't get signed until 3 weeks before the wedding. So
These things take time.
they take time, and the factor that takes time is the other party's not obligated to sign. They could sit there and just let the waivers go by until they decide, okay, I'm just going to negotiate more and more and more, because the one thing you need to consider is sometimes the parties are not on equal footing, and a lot of times people who come looking to get prenups feel like they can protect more than they actually can because they're not considering that the other party does not have to sign. Does that make sense? I mean,
that's
it's like if the other party had to sign, then they could actually protect, what they feel they need to protect. But to get a little, you got to give a little. That's negotiation. And sometimes people don't realize that when they start the prenuptial agreement process.
Oh, I think that's a huge piece for the audience, at least. Just give yourself some time. Don't reach out to, your attorney 3 weeks before the wedding and plan to get this done.
Yeah, if you reach out to me 3 weeks before the wedding, you won't be able to call me your attorney.
Right, exactly. So, but good frame of reference.
Yes, absolutely. And so the third foundational pillar is that this agreement has to comply with contract principles. It is a private contract, offer, acceptance, consideration, valid signature. I prefer to have them signed for a notary so that they're self-serving. But yeah, that's it. Offer, acceptance, consideration, signature. And that's contract provisions right there. The fourth one, I will say this, not mandatory. In my world, it is mandatory. It's the opportunity for attorney review and consultation. That's not one of those factors that the court will say we enforce it if it didn't happen. But in my world, if you don't have an attorney on the other side's signing a waiver of attorney representation, or I'm not signing the agreement.
Right. So
CYA.
To simplify that a little bit. If somebody hires you, you want to make sure that the other party has their own attorney to review, understand their rights, understand the agreement.
Right.
As they're signing, obviously, in front of a notary, because you just don't want to sign something blindly without fully understanding what you're signing.
Right. And I will say this, a well-versed prenuptial agreement attorney, whether they're drafting or reviewing, but specifically if they're drafting, always has a Rolodex of people that they can refer on the other side to say, here's an attorney that will help advise you of your rights and obligations for the other party.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because there is a network of attorneys in this area who are more well-versed at drafting prenups than others. Mm-hmm. So we know who will get the process done. You have to remember, the goal is we're trying to get you married. It's structured as an adversarial process, which is a shame, but it's how it's structured. But it shouldn't feel like one. It shouldn't feel like you're pitted against your spouse. It shouldn't feel like you're pitted against their attorney, or I should say future spouse. It should feel like it's a collaborative process. So the good prenuptial agreements not only can write a very good and well-drafted ironclad agreement, but they can facilitate the negotiation process in a way where it feels collaborative and not adversarial.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because I would think that people wouldn't think of it as a collaborative process, but
just because they're true attorneys,
right.
They vet that on its face says, okay, we're against each other, but why would you want to do that? You're getting married.
Right. We're going to work together, get it done, get you married.
Right.
And what are some common pitfalls that you do see as it relates to prenups and the enforceability? And
yeah, I would say, as I mentioned previously, timing is huge. People are inherently wired not to give themselves enough time to do things.
They're stressed about their weddings.
Exactly, right? Some of them are. I would say another pitfall about prenuptial agreements is, I mentioned this previously, but not understanding that it is a negotiation and there is push and pull and that you can't get everything you want. The money spouse, the money spouse often comes in and says, I'm protecting everything or I'm not marrying her. I'm like, that's a little bit of a macho mentality, if you will. It's like, you're obviously here because you want to marry the person, or, it's just, you got to give a little bit to get a little bit. And I would say the last pitfall that I often see is people approach this conversation in the worst way possible with their spouse or future spouse.
Oh, that's a really good point.
I mean, it is it's a taboo topic. Nobody wants to be told you need a prenuptial agreement to marry me. But there is a way to make it make sense for everybody to think about it the right way. I often recommend, like, hey, I need to have an important conversation with you. Let's spend a Friday night, get a bottle of wine and a cheese board. Honestly, like, that's what you can do. And it sounds like a date, but not like it just, if you can frame it in a way where you say, I want to protect myself in the event that the statistics of divorce or death catch up to us. And I want to protect you in the event that statistics and divorce catch up to us. And I also want to do this when we have good feelings for each other and not when there's ill will. That makes sense to most people. But most people don't have that conversation that way. Most people are only able to discuss what needs to happen at divorce when they're getting divorced. So if you can have the wherewithal to say, we need to have this conversation before it needs to be a conversation, you're all going to be protected much better. And not only that, you're going to save money on divorce attorneys afterwards because you have a prenuptial agreement. I mean, I don't know the full statistics around it, but I would assume that divorce lawyer fees are cut in at least half, if not more, if you have a prenuptial agreement. At least, I would say. I mean, just thinking about my cases that come with prenups versus those that don't.
But that's obviously, this is a taboo topic, but we are, we're talking about things that people are uncomfortable talking about in general, right? You're showing that full and fair disclosure, and you're showing all of your financials to your spouse, which we hope that you would do that. As a financial advisor, I always hope that my clients do that. Sometimes they don't. So you're getting that out there. And then, as you said, you're saying to your soon-to-be spouse, hey, I'm doing this to protect you. You're doing this to protect me. So that's really important. But we do recognize, at least I'll say I recognize, that that is a challenging discussion.
Yeah.
I think, in my opinion, involving a professional to have that discussion or help facilitate that discussion. And obviously, the other party would hire outside counsel to review documents and all that. But involving another professional helps to diffuse, or hopefully potentially diffuse, some of that stress, right?
It should. And, I don't want to be involved in every conversation as the professional when it comes to prenuptial agreements. In fact, I want to know that the client and the other party has had a conversation before they come to me. I don't want to be the one to reveal to the other party, hey, I'm the attorney for the person you're marrying who wants a prenup. That shouldn't be my job to reveal that.
Right.
In these circumstances, like, it's different than divorce. If I contact someone and say, hey, here's divorce papers, that's a little different than saying, here's a prenup. You're going into a marriage that needs to be built on trust, transparency, communication. This is a perfect chance to set those precedents.
Very, very true.
Right. So if you're never going to be able to have the hard conversations, that's not going to bode well for your marriage. If you're going to have the hard conversations, start here.
I love it.
Yeah.
Very well said. So, in conclusion, we got a lot of stuff here about prenups. And I think it's just so important because even as a financial advisor, they don't come up very often. It's not one of those questions where people come up and, do I need a prenup right away? So I think as the listener and viewer getting more education about what they are, who needs to have one, how they're enforceable, some common misnomers, all this education is just really important for the listener to understand so they can reach out to an attorney to see if it's a good fit for them. And how do you work that when someone calls your office? Do you say if it's a good fit or not?
I will say in most circumstances, if they've given me the appropriate time requirement and some background, and they've said that they're willing and able to have the conversation with their future spouse, it's generally a good fit. It's not much about personality. It's more so just, at least in this circumstance, it's just about my level of proficiency with the type of prenup they need, which, has grown over time because I've seen a variety of cases. But I also think it's about the comfort of the person calling with the idea that they're getting a prenuptial agreement. A lot of people, and I don't think it's necessarily sticker shock, so to speak. I mean, prenups are not cheap, but they're not as super expensive, and they're not nearly as expensive as divorce.
That's true.
And so I would say, putting it in financial terms, it's one of those rare opportunities to safeguard your finances and invest in your future. Because I think a lot of the times when we think of financial safeguards, like term life insurance, for example. Pretty cool. Don't look at that as an investment, and at least not something that they'll benefit from unless they pass away, and then their spouse or their kids are going to benefit from it. That's a safeguard in my mind. When you think of investments, you think of something that you're generating a return from, like stocks, bonds, anything that'll generate value for you in the long run. A prenup does both because you're able to craft terms that allow you to recover money that you would otherwise have to split with somebody else. But you're also safeguarding your finances by doing exactly that, but also by saving money in the future on a divorce lawyer.
Right.
And by, making sure that you're accurately protecting yourself financially and the person you love at the time that you're drafting the agreement. So yeah, I call it a financial safeguard and an investment. And it's a one-time opportunity because you're not going to get one or nearly as easily if you're already married. But the statistics say divorce is prominent. So definitely look into it. And we offer consultations just to discuss, what it would look like, what it would cost, if it's worth it for you. It's no pressure. The bottom line is the least you could do is reach out and find out if it's right for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So if you have the question in your head of, is this a good fit for me? Does this make sense for my situation, my financial picture, myself, my soon-to-be spouse? Give Greg a call.
Yeah.
Give an attorney, if he has other attorneys in the practice, give him a call and see if it's a good fit. And if it's not a good fit, or if it's not good for the particular situation, you'll be honest and say it's not a good fit for your situation. But at least make the call, take that first step, and don't wait until a week before you get married.
Yeah.
So we don't.
That's a good summary. Don't wait until a week before you get married, or don't wait until you get married.
Or don't wait till you get married. Exactly. So, well, thanks everybody for listening. We appreciate you taking the time to tune in today to talk about prenups. And again, Greg Gilston, the owner and managing attorney, of Gilston Legal, focusing in law and estate planning, family law and estate planning.
Yep.
Thanks so much.
Excellent. It was so good to you. Thank you, Alison.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Secure Money Mindset. For more, search Secure Money Mindset on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast, and watch full episodes on YouTube. Thanks for listening to Secure Money Mindset, where financial security is a state of mind.